Somehow, Pierce is one of those setups that has seemed to stand the test of time. Lilia is probably the oldest catastrophe unit coming out, and like the first year of the game's release, popularizing a brand new setup that focused solely on a niche substat. If a character runs off of any kind of pierce damage, you'll usually see it accompanied by a fat 3x, meaning their pierce output is going to be fat. And if you combine that with Lilia's passive, which will increase their allies' pierce rate by a value equal to half of her own, you're going to see pretty much a lot of pierce-based damage. It's pretty straightforward, pretty plain and simple. So, with Lilia, her gears are going to have pierce rate in the top row. You want to maximize this as much as you can. So, that also means coming on over to her weapons and equipping all of the pierce rate weapons. And if you've already maxed some weapons that don't include the pierce rate ones, then I would probably go back and max out those. Doesn't seem like there's too many. Looks like I only have 2, so I could either be missing some, or that's all there is. But in any case, we have a pierce rate of about 122.2. If I wanted to burn the 60 hammers for the, what, 0.5% per, or 0.1% per row, then we might hit 123. But good enough as it is. Her relic is pretty unnecessary. It's only going to recover some HP if you cleanse a debuff, and in order to cleanse a debuff, you have to hit a rank 2 heal, which based on its placement is a little more unlikely than a rank 2 AoE depletion, AoE ult gauge removal, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. But at every Pierce core, you're always going to see Lilia. The second slot has been traditionally a secondary support. Originally, this did go to Fraudrin. Fraudrin was pretty cool. He basically is a suicide stopper, locking up ults as long as he has higher CC. He couldn't do anything for 2 turns. At least you couldn't ult for 2 turns. Now the problem with Fraudrin is that as the meta evolved, more characters came out. Obviously, everybody gets power crept. This man's CC fell off pretty hard. He eventually became unusable, even with being on defense. You know, you get your links, you get your buffs. Just wasn't very viable, especially if you consider that his kit does absolutely nothing. He was only ran for his passive. Even his relic wasn't really enough to help him out there, so he did eventually get dropped. Now there are probably one of 2 replacements that came out for Fraudrin. The first one was Droll. Droll's pretty nice because he doesn't necessarily stop ult rush, or sorry, suicide, because the suiciders do cleanse. So I believe they would cleanse his ult lock, but they do stop traditional ult rush. Since you do have an ultimate move disable, it'll be a lot harder for them to get their ults off. Not to mention he does make the Pierce team a little tankier thanks to his commandment, applying some resistance buffs, and then that does synergize well with his relic, decreasing allies' damage taken per buff. So his kit a little more usable overall. But the current king in the secondary slot has actually been Ludo, who may also have a pretty bad kit overall, but when it comes down to his passive, out-CCing the enemy team is going to equal a defense related down by 40%. 40% is a pretty big number, right? That's almost half. That's crazy. You accompany that with the amount of pierce rate damage that you can output. If you've got enough of the boosts, the team does a lot of damage. He kind of is basically just a damage enabler. He wants to make people one-shot. And what better way to one-shot people than having a defense down of 40% as long as you out-CC, which, with his relic and being on defense, pretty easy to do. He does also have basic stat links, so you could throw on a counter melee or a Droll for more HP, and you're going to see pretty good CC gain here. If we take out Lilia and he's got a link, accompany this with CC cards, you know, he's hitting pretty decent number, 83k, not bad. Throw Lilia back on there. This is pretty much what the core of the team looks like today if you are running a Pierce team. These 2 slots are usually a primary and a secondary DPS, so best way to do this, we're going to go and sort by Pierce rate and remove the Lilia term. Now when it comes to putting traditional Pierce teams together, you probably aren't going to do anything with this top row, because these guys are better off in their own sort of racial setup. So Ku Sag Chandler on the Demon team better, Tyr on a Ragnarok or Unknown team, probably better. Bond's probably going on offense. Freya probably going on Pierce slash, not Pierce, sorry. Again, Unknown slash Ragnarok setup. So, back in the day, it was Blue Demon Meliodas. And then I think the first 2 seasons of Guild Wars, we saw SR Lizhawk and Hauser. We were pretty much trolling. There wasn't a lot of options at the time. Until Rugal came out with the first KOF collab. He went crazy with his all stat increase at heal after or below 50%. It was pretty nasty. He took up the slot for a while, and it wasn't until this collab with Demon Lord of Rimuru was this spot overtaken. And then you had some nasty AoE Pierce setup, and then you had single target Pierce, and this just became a pretty dominant setup. Now, obviously, Blue Demon Melee got phased out. He's not the best option. He's old, also a year 1 unit. We sort of phased away from a double Pierce setup, and because of Ludo, we ended up just focusing on raw damage. So this slot now could go to the newer, improved version of a Meliodas, which would be Traitor Melee, adding the resistance buffs to the entire team. Strong single target, again, AoE Pierce, damage boasted by these lovely people over here. Or you could throw in what people are doing now, which is Light Eska. Now, obviously, he has nothing to do with Pierce, but these guys are just boosting the damage so much. He might not have a Pierce card, but Pierce is still in the damage formula, so this is still a slight boost to damage. Nothing too crazy, but enough to warrant potential one-shots if the opposing comp is not prepared. Now, this slot also changes a couple times. If you have a 6/6 Rimuru, you're probably running him on Suicide for offense. So what would you put there? Well, you can bring it back to this Traitor Melee, and then you will have, again, the AoE Pierce. AoE from Escanor, and probably either his single target or Melee single target, depending on how you have your setup. Probably Escanor is going to be better since he'll be full HP for his single target. Other options did at one point include Chad King. His shield's pretty broken. His relic did give the basic stat to his shielding, so that was pretty nice. I think Heroes Arena also uses now Fumi. I don't know how viable he is in Guild Wars in this specific setup. I think I've seen it a couple times. Obviously, we've seen how it performs in Heroes Arena. It's nothing crazy. It's not terrible, but it is an option. If we were to look at the other Pierce options as well, I think the only other viable ones are going to be this bottom section. Because you do have Ghislaine, you do have Roxy, but I think they're better in Unknown setup. I think Levi has some potential, though he does like debuffs and he does like humans. And this Ludo would be better on an Angel setup as well. Which means there's not, like I said, too many actual Pierce options. I think having one is good enough, and then maybe one crazy DPS powerhouse is pretty much the way to go. Now, you could alter the team altogether. I think there is one slight unknown variation of this setup. It doesn't involve any of these individuals. The first up is Valentine's King, who pretty much just deals AoE debuff damage. And he has a weak point. Where is he at? Probably towards the bottom, yes. Boosting fairies damage and increasing applicable allies damage, which is going to be the 7 Deadly Sins. So we do a little bit of a 7 Deadly Sins focused team. We have King, then you would use Lowly Merlin, who has a debuff, and her relic scales based off of debuffs, or sorry, attacking a debuffed enemy. And then because you have an unknown, then you could make an argument for like Roxy, because she has a pierce attack. And then she is going to be throwing a barrier around a barrier around Merlin. And then Merlin, accompanied with her passive, is already going to be very hard to kill. This was a pretty niche setup, I would say. You don't see it too often. It's not crazy common, because at this point, right, Lilia, she's boosting Roxy, which is good. There's synergy here, there's synergy here, and then there's synergy here. So it's kind of all over the place, but it does work. Like I said, it's a much rarer team because not a lot of people are going to have Valentine's King. And then you may or may not have Roxy. That's kind of a toss in the air. But if you want to keep it traditional, right, we just throw this back onto Ludo. Where did you go? Right there. Ludo, and then probably Melee if you're running Rim on offense. And then good old Escanor. But I think for the most part, that's actually pretty much covering Pierce. Like, these guys are pretty simple. They're pretty straightforward. In terms of links, I would do something like this, probably. If we had to maximize Lilia, go for HP. Yeah, there you go. Grimoire, why not? Try to get the most CC as you can. I think I mentioned it earlier, definitely using high CC cards. We want to go, want to make sure that Ludo out CCs absolutely everyone on the team. Trader Melee does have this nice LR Esca link, so that's pretty big for CC. Escanor's always loved Merlin as a link. And then the Droll link for, again, higher CC. The team doesn't turn out to be too bad. There's a good chance that you could one-shot some comps, like I said. I think the only thing about this team is the survivability isn't crazy. Trader Melee does help, like I said, with that a little bit. But, yeah, I think that pretty much covers up your setup. So if you guys liked it, drop a thumb, maybe sub if you're into that, and I'll see you next one.